Hey everybody, it's Markus Allen. I'm recording this on Wednesday night, November 12th, 2014. I've got three people, including myself, on this audio. I am the owner of truthin7minutes.com. That's the number 7, truthin7minutes.com. We have Chris Kendall from hoaxbusterscall.com on the call. Hello, Chris.
Hello.
We've got we got Jim McKinney in Shenzhen, China on the call also. Hello, Jim.
Hey.
And we have John Adams somewhere in California. Hello, John.
How's it going?
Not so bad. So I've been listening to you always do a weekly call with Chris. Very fascinating stuff. But what was really fascinating was your expose. You're connecting the dots of the punk rock industry, because it is an industry. And what was particularly interesting to me, because it is my second home away from home, was the connections to Georgetown, the Georgetown Day School in, is that Georgetown? I don't know if that's actually called that. Well, anyway, just outside of Washington, D.C. We actually go to Alexandria a lot, and you just take the red line or the blue line up to Foggy Bottom, and that brings you to Georgetown University. Right next to Georgetown University is the Georgetown Day School. So I heard these at least a couple calls, maybe 3 calls, where you're piecing together how the culture creation / punk rock industry is manufactured. It is not grassroots. It's rather what we call astroturfing. But it was really kind of disjointed. And I wanted to do this call and kind of make it a nice straight line of what you've come up with. So I'll just give you the floor. I mean, do you have like an outline kind of speech, or do you want me to just ask you questions, or how do you want to roll with it?
I could just give a brief overview, and then you could, ask questions.
Great. Let's do it. You got the floor.
I guess you could say that punk music in its incarnation, where it was known as punk, after the rise of the around 1976 out of England, which was predated by a proto-punk period that came out of New York City, it really started to take off. And the whole England punk movement was completely and totally manufactured from the bottom up. And I think that there were elements of the New York the American scene in punk from an earlier time period that were probably grassroots, but most of those bands were on major labels, so they were kind of being guided. And it became termed underground music because there wasn't a lot of money put into it, like, the big bands like Led Zeppelin and The Who and bands of that nature. So it was termed underground, even though it was on major labels. So round about the end of the 70s, you have music that starts to be called hardcore in one way or another. There's different stories as to who started calling themselves a hardcore band first. It's mainly attributed to a band out of Reno, Nevada called 7 Seconds.
Okay.
The interesting thing about the band 7 Seconds is they put out their record on a label called Positive Force Records.
Mm-hmm.
And Positive Force is a political action group based out of Washington, D.C., and it says here from the Positive Force Wikipedia page, Positive Force came together in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1985, termed the Revolution Summer. According to the book Dance of Days, A History of D.C. Punk, Positive Force DC co-founder Mark Anderson and Mark Jenkins, up to a dozen chapters at one point or another, the Washington, D.C. group is the only one to survive. It continues to operate today. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is not a grassroots organization. Okay? This is completely and totally, funded by big names and things of that nature. And so that's what this band, 7 Seconds, put out their first record on that Positive Force label. It was backed by this political action group. And Ian MacKaye, who we'll talk about in a minute, has been quoted in interviews saying that he believed that Positive Force was a communist front group.
Okay.
And this Washington, D.C. Scene around that time was really pushed by a couple of bands, but mainly the band Minor Threat to start. And that had a guy named Ian MacKaye in it, who, with the drummer from Minor Threat, Jeff Nelson, started a record label called Discord Records.
Okay.
And from Discord Records, you get a lot of the bands from the D.C. area putting out the records. And you also get from Minor Threat the term straight edge, which became very popular and is still popular today, and became an offshoot of the hardcore punk movement. And straight edge is involved with the idea of something that's countering the earlier ideas of punk, which was that we were going to be everything that's, family oriented and, white picket fences and swimming pools. So we're going to drink, smoke, and do drugs and have, sex with everybody until the sun comes up. And then they came in with a straight edge thing later where it was the exact opposite of it. You don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't have premarital sex, and that is being anti-establishment. After Minor Threat got its start and pushed that whole idea of straight edge out, you had a lot of different guys who, like Henry Rollins is one of them, to come out of the Washington, D.C. area, and he became the singer of Black Flag. Mm-hmm. And Black Flag already existed as a band, and they were pretty popular in the punk scene. And for some reason, when he showed up to one of their shows in New York City, they just decided to let him become the singer of the band.
He was auditioned. Did you hear me talk about that last week?
I did. I watched that Greg Ginn interview with Eric Blair, who I actually know Eric Blair. Uh-huh. He lives in Orange County. Uh-huh. And that was very interesting. It kind of contradicts the Henry Rollins story a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, Henry Rollins is full of contradictions. And if you let's see here, he was born Henry Lawrence Garfield in Washington, D.C., and he was raised in the elite Glover Park neighborhood. Now, Glover Park plays a pivotal role in the entire Washington, D.C. punk movement. It's where all of these kids lived. They all lived in this one elite area called Glover Park. And that was mainly like lobbyists and people who were involved in government, live in this area. Okay?
Okay.
So for this anti-establishment, anti-government type punk movement to come out of this area is kind of fishy.
Sure.
It says Henry's parents divorced when he was 2 years old. He was raised by his mother. His father was a military man who disciplined Henry with his fists, and his mother was considered a bit unhinged. Henry even told Rolling Stone in 1992 that he was sexually molested many times as a child. He suffered from depression and low self-esteem, and he was put on Ritalin. He was raised primarily by his mother, Iris, who taught him how to read before he was enrolled in kindergarten. However, due to bad grades and poor conduct, he was soon enrolled in the Bullis School. The Bullis School is an independent, non-denominational, co-educational college prep school for grades 3 to 12. The school enrolls 640 students, and it's located in Potomac, Maryland. It primarily caters to the wealthy and affluent families in the Washington, D.C. area and is known for attendance by current and past billionaires' children. It is a preparatory school for the United States Naval Academy. okay?
Mm-hmm.
According to Henry, the Bullis School helped him to develop a sense of discipline and strong well-being. So that's where this big dog who comes out of the punk industry went to school with billionaires' kids.
Right.
Okay. If you look at the alumni, and I did not know this till the other day, and it was very surprising to me because this type of stuff is similar to the research done by Dave McGowan on Laurel Canyon.
Yep.
I did not know this, and I didn't see this ever mentioned in McGowan's articles, but John Phillips is a Bullis School alumni from the Mamas and the Papas.
Okay.
So I thought that was an interesting thing to find out that John Phillips also went there, and his family is knee deep in the intelligence industry.
And what school is this again?
It's called the Bullis Academy.
Okay. I'm taking a lot of notes, so I'm just typing away. I see it bullis.org. Co-ed grades 2 through 12.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I looked up Henry's school, his 12th grade photo. And when you're a senior, you get to write little notes next to your picture in the annual.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote he already knew he was in clean living at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote he was going to terrorize the nation.
Right, I remember you saying that. Mm-hmm.
Now I dug up an old interview with one of the was he the drummer? I think he was the drummer in Henry's first band. Henry had a band called State of Alert before he was in Black Flag. And the drummer's name was Ivor Hansen. Okay?
Okay.
And Ivor Hansen's dad was a Navy admiral who was they lived on the Naval Observatory right there in Washington, D.C., which is where the vice president lives. And so the band, the anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian band State of Alert got to actually practice on base whenever they had a practice.
Right.
Okay. So I dug up this interview with Ivor Hansen. This is what he said about Henry Rollins, okay?
Mm-hmm.
He said, I know he said before that I was born angry, and I've been angry since the first day I was on this planet. But along with that, I would say he's angry and he's got a lot of things on his mind, and he goes about exploring them, talking about them, thinking about them. He's also one of the most driven people I've ever met. What was always impressive about him and Ian MacKaye was that they were like 18 and 19 years old, and they already knew what they wanted to do, which was be in bands, but they knew how they were going to do it. Ian had Discord Records, and he was going to do it that way, and Henry was going to be on any label he wanted to be on and just go overground. They just knew. There was a certainty about it. I don't mean that they knew they were going to be a big deal or rock stars or anything like that. They just knew what they were going to do to make a difference and to be influential in their own way. It was really impressive. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Very clairvoyant.
Yeah. And let's see here. I thought this was a interesting thing here. He says, I have amazing respect for Henry. Okay, this is Ivor Hansen, okay?
Mm-hmm.
He says, I have amazing respect for Henry. My wife works for the United Nations. And
Right.
for the past 3 years, I was living in the South Pacific because we were based there. We were listening to the BBC a lot because that's what you could get. And you know you're going to hear Henry on the BBC being taken seriously. People wanted to know what was on his mind and what he's doing, what his latest project and all the rest. You know, worldwide audience. Or he plays in New Zealand or Australia, or does his spoken word stuff. It's just so amazing what he's accomplished. I can't believe he's only 50 in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple things there. Ivor Hampton's wife works for the United Nations. That's what happens to, just normal punk rockers, I guess.
Sure. Anti-establishment ones at that.
Right. Yeah. So, that's the basic story of Henry Rollins. He goes on to fame and fortune, and now he lives in Hollywood Hills. And he's still very good friends with Ian MacKaye still to this day. And like I said, Ian MacKaye was the singer for Minor Threat. He was also the singer and guitar player for a band called Fugazi. And Ian MacKaye also was raised in Glover Park. And his dad was a White House correspondent for the Washington Post at one time, and later he was a religion expert for the Washington Post. So his dad was, spin doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And for some unexplained reason, he just up and moved his family one year to Palo Alto, California, so he could get a degree at Stanford University. And then they moved back to the Washington, D.C. area. And, then Ian starts Discord Records with his buddy Jeff Nelson, who was the drummer for Minor Threat. And Jeff Nelson's autobiography or biography is not very interesting, except for one thing that I found in a book called We Could Be Your New Favorite Band. I believe the guy's name's Michael Azared. And it just says this one little throwaway line in there. It just says, Jeff Nelson was a State Department brat.
So he was the son of someone who worked for the State Department.
Exactly. Either both parents or one of his parents worked for the State Department.
Right.
So then there was Brian Baker, who was the guitar player for Minor Threat. And he, by the way, I keep forgetting to mention that Jeff Nelson, Brian Baker, and the other guy in Minor Threat, his name was Lyle Preslar, who ended up being a lawyer, some sort of music lawyer, and he was also the head of a very big record label at one time called Caroline Records, and married a lady who was an executive at VH1, because that's what punks do. They all attended a school called the Georgetown Day School.
Right.
Now, in the past, I've incorrectly said that the Georgetown Day School was a Jesuit school. That's actually the Georgetown Prep School. So don't get those two confused. The Georgetown Prep School is connected to Georgetown University.
Yes.
And that's actually a Jesuit-run institution. The Georgetown Day School is a privately run institution. Okay.
But it's easy to understand the confusion because the Georgetown Day School is literally across the street from Georgetown University.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. Why they're not connected, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But if you're online right now, you could just look at the Georgetown Day School alumni.
Yes.
And you can look and see all of the people who attended Georgetown Day School, and a lot of them are entertainers or involved with some sort of news.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of strange.
Where would you find the list? I'm on the site right now at gds.org, and I clicked on alumni.
If you go, I saw on their Wikipedia page.
Oh, the Wikipedia page. Okay. So,
and it has notable alumni or something like that.
Yes, I will track that down. So keep going.
So, yeah, these guys all in Minor Threat, they all met at this school.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Brian Baker, who they interviewed for a film that came out in 2006 called American Hardcore, and it was a basic overview of the American hardcore punk scene. But they picked Brian Baker to interview to give this one little throwaway clip that said, naturally, if you live in Washington, D.C., your parents work in government and are policymakers and work in the media.
That's ridiculous.
It's also interesting that it's very hard to find anything out about Brian Baker's parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that they chose him to say that. So I've never been able to find out anything about his background, except that he went to the Georgetown Day School, and that they chose him also for that movie to make a quote about the Georgetown Day School being, quote unquote, a hippie school.
I really want to comment on what he said, because that is just not true. Like I said, it's my second home away from home. There are all sorts of people down there. They're not all, heads of state, working for the United Nations, and that's just ridiculous. A lot of people. Now there are a lot of people who are in the military. That is for sure.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it was like I said, it's just meant to be a kind of throwaway line. And immediately after they interview him, they interview a guy by the name of Kenny Inouye. And Kenny Inouye was a guitar player in a band called Marginal Man, which was on Discord Records. And it's so funny because Marginal Man is like, they're like a nothing nobody band. Like, they had no influence in that particular scene, like all the other bands we've mentioned. And they interviewed this guy for this movie, American Hardcore, literally just so he could say, "My dad is Hawaii Senator Daniel Inouye."
Hmm.
Right, and then that's all they clip him right there. They never interview him again. They never play any of the music from his band. They never show any live footage of his band playing. They just say he was the guitar player in Marginal Man, and his dad was United States Senator from Hawaii, Daniel Inouye.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've talked about before, Daniel Inouye, he was in the Senate for like 50 years. He was a big-time insider. And so his son, of course, makes sense, was in an anti-establishment punk band.
Right. Makes
sense.
Of course. Sarcasm.
So,
is Kenny Inouye Nioway?
I think it's Inouye.
Oh, that's why I can't find it. There we go. I found it. Okay, keep going.
Let's see. Well, after Minor Threat, Ian MacKaye had a couple of other bands, but his next big thing was a band called Fugazi.
Mm-hmm.
And Fugazi pretty much pioneered what was called post-hardcore music. Mm-hmm. And so they had two singers. Ian MacKaye was one singer, and the other singer was a guy named Guy. It's either Guy or G. Picciotto. And he was a Georgetown Day School attendee. He also attended Georgetown University. He was an English major at Georgetown. And so, once again, you have this Georgetown Day School connection with the second band.
And what was the band member's name who went to Georgetown Day School from Fugazi?
His name was Guy. It's spelled like Guy,
uh-huh.
Guy,
uh-huh.
And it's Picciotto.
Okay. Okay.
And then their bass player, his name is Joe Lally, Lally. And he quit his day job at NASA so he could play bass in Fugazi.
NASA,
yeah.
Sweet. More establishment type of operations.
Yeah, it's just a really strange thing, and so Fugazi goes on to be one of the biggest bands ever. You can read interviews with Smashing Pumpkins and Sonic Youth and all of these, alternative household name bands, and they'll all say that, Fugazi is a huge influence on them. And even if you go on their Wikipedia page, it'll say that Fugazi is one of the most influential alternative post-hardcore bands ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so round about the same time, you have, I'll just read here from Wikipedia. Ian MacKaye had been a strong proponent of the Riot Girl movement, going as far as to produce Bikini Kill's self-titled EP because of the male-dominated tendencies of punk concerts during the 1980s. He felt women were pushed away from the movement. He has discussed gender equality in some of his songs, and he has been a supporter of Riot Girls despite being a supporter of Riot Girl, he came under criticism by those within the movement who claimed MacKaye was simply capitalizing on gender equality for ulterior motives.
Okay.
Okay, now what is Riot Girl? Riot Girl, the Riot Girl scene was considered to be the third wave of the feminist movement.
Right.
Okay. Now, this supposedly came out of Olympia, Washington. And once again, you got another little area, and also named Washington, coincidentally, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But it all comes out of this college called Evergreen College.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they had a local radio station there. Once again, coincidentally enough, probably not. The radio station was called KAOS.
Okay.
Chaos.
Okay.
Okay. And one of the people who started a program on that radio station was the guy who owned Sub Pop Records. His name was Bruce Plavitt.
Okay.
And it's so funny, if you go on, once again using Wikipedia, but if you go on his Wikipedia page, it says, when Bruce Plavitt arrived at Evergreen College, he immediately started a radio program.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what?
He has the record label called Sub Pop.
That's correct. And you'll see a lot of what was later called alternative music, like Nirvana. Nirvana was originally on the Sub Pop record label. That all comes out of Sub Pop Records. Okay, this Riot Girl scene all comes out of Evergreen College, where he went to college as well, and you have all of these Washington D.C. people, for some reason, in and around this whole Seattle grunge Riot Girl thing that was going on. One of these people is a woman named Kathleen Hanna. Okay.
Yep.
Kathleen Hanna is an American musician, feminist activist, and punk zine writer. In the early to mid-90s, she was the lead singer of feminist punk band Bikini Kill before fronting La Tigra in the late 1990s and in early 2000. In 1998, never mind that part, a documentary film was released about Hanna by director Cindy Anderson titled The Punk Singer, detailing Hanna's life and career, as well as revealing her long battle with Lyme disease. Hanna is married to Adam Horovitz of the Beastie Boys. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now here's the interesting part. Okay. Hanna moved with her family to Calverton, Maryland in 1971. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Calverton, Maryland is right next to Alexandria.
Yep.
So it's right there in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, this is kind of funny. Everybody should get a kick out of this. As Hanna's father changed occupations from time to time, the family moved several more times.
And why is that funny?
Maybe her dad was an intelligence operative.
Oh,
always changing. It doesn't mention what her dad did.
Gotcha.
I'm just speculating, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
Hanna first became interested in feminism around the age of 9. Okay, she's 9 years old. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
around the age of 9, after her mother took her to a rally in Washington, D.C., where Gloria Steinem and Bella Abzug spoke.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So then, so Kathleen Hanna, she becomes basically the poster child of third wave feminism. She's prominently featured often in, girly magazines, like Sassy magazine from the 90s, and they're given a lot of coverage, even though there's this, Bikini Kill didn't talk to the media, neither did Fugazi. Fugazi would never get interviewed in Rolling Stone or Spin, ever. Right? But that gave them, street cred.
Right.
And so they never talked to the media, which made the media report on them even more.
The principle of scarcity.
Yeah. And so the drummer from Bikini Kill was Kurt Cobain's girlfriend. And her last name escapes me, and her name's Toby Vale. That's her last name, Toby Vale. Okay. But yeah, she was Kurt Cobain's girlfriend. And then Kathleen Hanna dated Dave Grohl, the drummer of Nirvana and the lead singer of the Foo Fighters. Mm-hmm. And Dave Grohl was born in a suburb of Washington, D.C. I think it's Springfield, Virginia.
Yep.
And he was also in the Washington, D.C. punk scene. He played in a band called Dane Bramage.
Dane Bramage, okay. Little flip on the letters.
Yeah. And then he moved to Olympia, Washington, I guess, for no reason.
Well, doesn't everyone do that?
Yeah. Everyone who lives in a suburb of Washington, D.C., apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And then right around the time all of this stuff is happening, this is, 1988, 1989, you have to think back what was on television. Adam Curry was on music television.
Mm-hmm.
Long hair, heavy metal, partying, girls, that type of thing. But see, movements don't happen overnight. They take a couple of years to actually take effect. And so when they pulled the plug on MTV and the whole hair metal thing, they quickly brought in the grunge and the alternative stuff. And it was all ready to go. The whole scene was ready to go. That whole Seattle grunge scene already existed. It was ready to be commercialized and brought out to the masses.
Isn't that called nu metal or ska punk?
No, that stuff's kind of a little later.
Okay.
It was just basically called grunge or alternative music.
Okay.
So another as far as the Washington D.C. thing goes, I think that pretty much covers it as far as the players within that particular scene.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, they all tie into the biggest band to come out of that particular era, which is Nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
Nirvana was the cash cow of the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So
I spent all day, unfortunately, contaminating my brain, finding out about this thing called punk rock. And I watched this documentary, and I have 5 clips from it. And the documentary is called, and I will put this in the companion notes, of course, the 90s punk rock documentary from 2008.
In 84.
And take a listen to this.
We were going to shows, myself and Greg Kay and a couple other guys, and we tried to get into a Social Distortion show, and it was sold out. This was in Irvine, Orange County also. So we had nothing to do, so of course we went to somebody's house whose parents weren't home, and were drinking beer in the backyard and stuff, and just kind of shooting the shit and said, why don't we start our own band? Of course, none of us played instruments at all, but that didn't seem like a deterrent at the time.
None of us played instruments at all, and that didn't stop us as a deterrent at the time. Do you know
Who was that?
I was going to ask if you recognized the voice.
No, I don't.
Dexter Holland.
Dexter Holland. Oh, he's from the Offspring.
Yes.
Yeah.
And isn't he now worth like $1 gazillion?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I have to say, even though I've met the drummer from the Offspring and I went to his house one time, he's actually a pretty nice guy. Oh man, they're god awful.
Well, he just explained why they didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up the Offspring. One band that kind of does tie into this whole era. There's another band from Orange County I'll bring up too, but one band is Bad Religion.
Okay.
And Bad Religion, the guitar player from Bad Religion, his name is Brett Guritz, and he owns Epitaph Records.
That's right.
Which put out the Offspring. And the guy's a mega bazillionaire.
Yep.
Okay, but he made all this money singing about how, bad the American way of life is, how bad, the Protestant ethic is, how bad all this type of stuff is. And, you don't have to agree with any of those things, but how bad capitalism is. And like I said, you don't have to agree with all that stuff, but he has sure made a lot of money ragging on all the things that he is now a part of.
I'm going to play another clip speaking of that.
And Time Bomb were on the radio. It was around that time that I quit my band after writing a record for my band that went gold. So, one day punk rock is this cool underground thing that I'm doing and working very hard on and nurturing and developing, and then it just popped.
I call it the democratization of punk, when punk left the urban center and you could now find it in the malls throughout America, throughout the world.
Yep.
That was Brett Guritz.
Yep.
Yeah, that guy's a dick. Seriously, I mean, give me a break. We everybody knows who's going to listen to this thing that nothing happens by chance.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, punk. I mean, I was in high school when the punk rock thing went commercial. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like grunge. It was one of those things where like you woke up one day and all of a sudden punk rock is all over the radio.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's not one of those things where it's like they used to do this back in the '60s with local radio stations. Like they'd spin a record, and if they got enough calls for it to be repeated, then they'd play it again, and so on down the line. That's kind of how something grassroots would get popular, is if people actually liked it and they were calling the radio stations, hey, play this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not how this stuff was. This stuff was like a package deal already ready to come out. They pushed it out into the open, and then it was forced. It forced out whatever the old thing was. And then you kind of forgot about that old thing, and then you just adopted the new thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
here's another clip that you'll find interesting.
Okay.
Part to do with it was that they were really, I mean, if you think about that label, here's a guy that's like, probably selling records out of his apartment, and he ends up making some of the most definitive punk rock in history. That were coming out of, with like Bad Religion, Rancid, No Effects, Pennywise, and Offspring. I mean, shit, that's 5 fucking huge bands, and then there's us.
You know who that was?
No, who's that?
I'll give you a hint. Obviously, it was a punk band singer. Not good enough hint. And Green Day.
Oh, Billy Joe.
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically, he said that this Brett Gurewitz guy, if that's the guy he's talking about, was basically working out of his apartment, and next thing you know, he has basically 6 mega star hit rock bands or grunge bands.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. Yeah. The funny thing about it is that there's a local radio station here in Los Angeles. It's called K-Rock.
Oh, yeah.
And KROQ. And K-Rock is, like, known around the world. I mean, I think you can probably get K-Rock in other parts of the world. And K-Rock used to play... Well, when K-Rock originally started out, they were playing, stuff like Duran Duran.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And kind of the 80s synth pop stuff. And then as it got later on, they started playing more music that was considered alternative music. The Smiths, The Cure, REM, The Replacements, those type of things. Out of nowhere, for some unapparent reason, when this whole idea of alternative music switched, there was still like music at that time that you could consider alternative, that was different than punk music, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was still an alternative stream of music, because that term alternative, of course, if you want to get deep into that, you just break that word up. It means to alter the native, right?
Right.
So the term alternative was no longer meant alternative to the mainstream. It became the title of the type of music you played. It's like, hey, what kind of music do you play? I play alternative music, right? That term actually used to have some sort of meaning, like, hey, this is an alternative to what's on the radio. Well, when the alternative became the mainstream, somehow radio stations like K-Rock didn't keep playing alternative music. They started playing all of the punk rock stuff straight off of the Epitaph record label, and it was like you would turn on K-Rock and they would just have like a whole hour of just all bands from Epitaph. It was really weird, and I'm sure they had some sort of deal with them at some point. But like I said, K-Rock is immensely popular amongst Southern California, and I know it gets broadcast around the world somewhere.
I have 2 more clips. Take a listen.
I mean, I don't know if major labels were trying to poach my bands, but I got numerous offers from my label. I've turned down $50 million offers more than once.
Hey, I got an offer to sell Fat Records, but I didn't want to sell it.
You mainly,
So this, once again, the same guy, his name is Brett Gurewitz, turned down $50 million offer.
Yeah, because he knew he was going to make way more money than that.
But it wasn't about the money. It was just about being anti-establishment.
Yeah, it's like Chris pointed out the other day that Bad Religion played the Reason rally in Washington, D.C. Yeah, that's really anti-establishment.
Mm. Here's one more clip.
People love to ask those questions, like, when did you know this was going to happen, or when did you feel? It's like they're never exact moments necessarily, because you got to remember, we're traveling, touring 13 months out of the year. We're always gone, sleeping on floors, making it happen. So every little piece of good news comes in strides. So it doesn't happen overnight. Well, it does to some people, but not for Blink.
So that was Blink 182. I don't know the guy's name. Maybe you recognize his voice.
Yeah, I really don't like that band, so I've never. I think the guy's name's Mark something or other.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yep. So he was basically saying that there are no overnight successes. Well, maybe there are.
Yeah. Yeah. See, you have to understand what overnight success actually means. I know that band had not been around very long before they got successful. I mean, they had been around a while, but not very long at all before they were catapulted into the stratosphere. And now they're, or I guess what, like 10 or 12 years ago, their drummer had even his own reality show where you followed him and his wife around and stuff like that. You see, that whole culture that was supposedly anti all of these things really became all of that type of stuff, and then there's no mention of any sort of hypocrisy or any you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That gets all pushed by the wayside, and Chris and I had discussed too that most of the punk politics is all very leftist. It's all very right-left paradigm. You're not going to find any truth in there. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, I mean, I would have been very receptive to a band that was talking about, something that would have been considered quote-unquote anti-government, that would have been, for lack of a better term, talking about conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
But I always felt very alienated because I liked a lot of the music. I liked the way the guitars sound. I liked the way the drums, the bass, it was very aggressive. And when you're a teenager, you like that stuff. You grow out of it, of course. But I could never get into the whole politics of it. So I would just listen to the music and ignore the lyrics.
Or so you thought. Or so you thought you were ignoring the lyrics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. There is subtleties and certain things you definitely won't be able to ignore, even though you think you are. Mm-hmm. That's why I tend to listen to more instrumental music than anything else.
Are you familiar with Brian Holland?
Brian Holland. It sounds familiar.
Of the band Offspring?
I thought, it was Dexter Holland?
Yes, exactly. But his real name is Brian Holland.
Oh, is that right?
And I'll post this in the notes. He wrote a paper, and here's the title: "The Identification of Human Micro-RNA-like Sequences Embedded Within the Protein Encoding Genes of the Human Immunodeficiency Virus," which of course is HIV.
Mm-hmm. Weird.
Weird. I mean, doesn't that kind of lend? I mean, is he somehow? From my research today, it seems like that everyone knew him as, being this punk rocker who was this brilliant guy who talked about HIV stuff. Was this some sort of way to introduce to us the concept of HIV through music?
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, I mean, if you go back and you watch movies from the 1990s, if you go watch television shows from the 1990s, everything was about promoting safe sex because everybody was scared of HIV. Every television show had an HIV episode. There's all sorts of HIV movies. They're all very directed at teens. There's two ways you could possibly look at it, and you've been very good at pointing this type of stuff out, and I concur with what you say about this. If you want to scare people, or if you want people to do something like have sex when you're a teenager,
tell them not to
scare them with HIV.
Yeah. Yep.
So there was nothing more successful. I mean, I was when I first got into high school.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually pretty naive as to how many people were having sex when I was like 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of found out, like, you mean all those girls have sex?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Right.
And I was like, and I was thinking along the lines like, man, we're young. Like,
mm-hmm.
So it definitely worked.
The Gilman Street Project and the date December 31st, 1986. What does that mean for you?
I know that Gilman Street was a punk rock venue.
Yep.
In San Francisco. One of the more famous bands to come out of San Francisco during the 1980s is the band The Dead Kennedys. Does it have anything to do with Jello Biafra?
What or who is that?
Oh, he is the singer of the band The Dead Kennedys.
Okay.
And now he's kind of a political figure.
Wasn't thinking that was the date that Gilman Street Project opened, December 31st, 1986.
Right? Okay. Yeah, Gilman Street, Green Day came out of that scene. The band Rancid came out of that scene.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, the Dead Kennedys, which were a very famous punk band, came out of that whole area. They were a little bit earlier, but I'm sure they played into that.
So basically, punk rock died in 1984 through 86, and then Gilman Street Project is responsible for bringing it back.
Probably in that area. I don't think it ever really officially died. What it did is it took on new names and new guises and splintered off into all sorts of other things. One of the things, like I was saying before, it splintered off into the straight edge movement.
Can you explain to us what that is? You've said that a couple of times. I don't know what that is.
Okay, straight edge was there was a song by the band Minor Threat from Washington D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And the song was based around their philosophy, and their philosophy was no drinking, no drugs, no premarital sex, no religion.
No religion.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they called this philosophy straight edge.
Which is a religion.
Okay. Right, exactly. They just took all the stuff from the religion and said, okay,
here's your new religion.
We're taking the beliefs and we're making it our own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this spread around the country, this idea of this straight edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the areas in the country it took on very very strongly was in New York. And hardcore punk around about the mid to late 80s just lost the punk and just became hardcore music. Okay. And it's hardcore music is kind of the sound is kind of a merger of punk and metal.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all sorts of offshoots of that, like thrash and speed metal and all and things of that nature. But hardcore music merged with this straight edge philosophy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the bands that was pioneering in that aspect was a band called The Youth of Today. Okay.
Okay.
Now, interestingly enough, because you guys have discussed this type of thing, you know what the symbol for straight edge is?
A compass and a square?
Close. It's an X.
Oh. Okay.
So if you go to a straight edge show, straight edge concert,
mm-hmm.
you will see teenagers and people who are straight edge with X's on their hands. Sometimes you'll see people with X's tattooed on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I had friends who were into this type of stuff when I was younger, and I liked some of that music. And like I said, I hung out with people who were into that type of stuff, but they didn't really understand. You know, it's kind of something you grow out of if you're not totally into it. Because it's a very militant philosophy. It's like, hey, I don't hang out with anybody who does any of that type of stuff, and I don't really like those type of people. And so, if you're smart, you don't stay involved with that type of stuff very long. And one of the things that this band, the Youth of Today, kicked off was the idea of what were called the youth crews. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was basically like a gang. Instead of your gang, you had your crew, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm from the East Side Straight Edge crew. I'm from the North Side Straight Edge crew, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these people would all go to shows, and they'd have, sweatshirts with their crew name, or their hats as their crew name on it. And this band got this idea of, brotherhood and togetherness through straight edge, and you've got these crews and whatever, and they go to shows and they get in fights with people who drink or whatever. And after they started all of this whole thing up, out of the blue, out of nowhere, the guitar player and the singer decided to turn into Hare Krishnas.
I remember you saying that, yep.
And then they started a whole splinter movement off of that, and they called it Krishna Core, where it was the straight edge philosophy, but it was merged with the idea of the whole Hare Krishna Eastern religion thing. And then there were magically out of the blue, there were all of these Krishna straight edge bands popping up everywhere, and then you had all of these kids turning into Hare Krishnas, but at the same time wearing X's on their hands and all sorts of weird stuff. It just turned into Bizarro World.
Mm.
And so that guy, his name is Ray Capo, he apparently is still around today, and is still pushing this whole idea of Krishna Core still to this day, and he is a yoga teacher in New York City.
New Age.
Yeah, New Age. And one of the premier straight edge record labels out there that put out a lot of bands. Guess what the name of that record label was?
Guys, do you have any idea? I have no idea. I'm going to defer to my panel of guessers. No one?
I'll just say it.
Okay.
It's called New Age Records.
Oh, of course. That's funny.
And then the record label that the guy from Youth of Today started, which is one of the bigger record labels for that particular type of music, is called Revelation Records, and its symbol is a red star.
Oh, I know the answer. Is it New Age Records? Oh, sorry.
There's a little delay on our end here.
I was running to the microphone. Trying to get
Skype.
No.
Damn Skype.
Oh, sorry.
Actually, that's good timing. John said he had an hour. We're literally 2 minutes away from an hour. So did you guys have any quick questions for John or comments about his revelations? If not,
I got one about British punk rock. Any insights into that? Like Sex Pistols, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. Sex Pistols were a manufactured band from top to bottom. Whether or not the actual members of the band were in on the scam, that's debatable. I think probably the lead singer was in on it, but I don't know about the rest of the guys personally. Their manager's name was Malcolm McLaren, and Malcolm McLaren and his wife Vivian Westwood owned a sex shop in London. And they were famous for all sorts of types of weird, rubber and sadomasochistic leather type stuff. They took a trip over to New York City, and they saw a lot of the things going on with the scene over in New York City. And like I was saying before, the New York City proto-punk scene, it really wasn't, the music, you wouldn't ever describe it as punk. Okay, like two of the biggest bands that come out of the so-called punk scene in New York City were Blondie and the Talking Heads. You wouldn't really call them punk bands. So when they came back from that scene, they took a lot of things that they saw there, like these guys. There's this one guy who was in this band called the Voidoids. His name is Richard Hill, and he had this, shirt that he had ripped apart and then put back together with safety pins. So they took that idea and a lot of those ideas, and they mass marketed it to the youth of Britain. And they created this whole thing. And they must have been given the okay to do this, because it literally spread like wildfire all over Britain, especially with, the anti-establishment punk band, the Sex Pistols, which were splattered all over every newspaper virtually every day of their existence. And that wasn't even very long. And the Sex Pistols were allowed to go on British television. And if you watch the documentary The Filth and the Fury, the story of the Sex Pistols, they interviewed Johnny Rotten, and he said, who's the lead singer of the Sex Pistols, they interviewed him, and he's saying, from after that interview, British culture was completely and totally changed. And what happened on the interview was, on live television, there was this conservative father-type figure-looking host, dressed in a suit and tie, and he's interviewing these guys with safety pins in their noses and everything else. And he is literally egging them on to see, like, the most foul cuss words on live television. So they allowed this. This was totally allowed by the establishment to happen, because they wanted to totally destroy the youth culture of Britain, and it was done on purpose. Another thing that happened was, the first time the Sex Pistols ever played, there was this one gig, their very first gig, and as the story goes, every single person in that audience started a punk band that got signed to a major record label. What do you think the odds of that are?
That's funny.
Literally, the bands, The Clash, The Damned, Joy Division, the Buzzcocks, The Jam, they all, Susie and the Banshees, all of those bands, major label bands, everybody was in the audience, and they all say that they saw that show.
That's from the movie 24-Hour Party People, I believe, talks about that.
Yeah, that movie's based on the story of the band Joy Division, which became the band New Order. But yeah, you're right. But that's an old story, like, in punk lore. But the band Joy Division has a strange story, considering the lead singer killed himself the day before they were supposed to go on tour in America.
Wow.
So.
Hey, John, we're up against your hour that you said that you had. Are you approaching your driveway, or can we go a few minutes more?
Yeah, go a couple minutes more. It's fine.
Hey, Chris, I hear a lot of echo. Is that from your side?
Oh, probably, yeah. Let me mute my mic.
Okay. I'm sure there are people out there, including myself, who are like, how do you know all this stuff? Are you just a rabid fan of punk rock? Or it sounds like you know people in the industry. Are you in the industry? How do you know all this stuff?
I'm just a former rabid fan of music in general. So if you wanted to have a talk about jazz music or classical music or 1950s rock and roll or 1960s pop music, we could have a talk about any of those musics, and I could probably hip you to a lot of stuff you didn't know. I've just been a student of music ever since I was about 5 years old.
But like you said that you know a few of these people in the bands. Is that because you have a band of your own and that's how you're linked?
I used to play in bands, but I never played in any punk bands. I played in a punk band when I was much younger, but we never played any shows of any significance. There was a bar, and Chris has been to it. He knows what I'm talking about. In Orange County, it was called the Doll Hut.
Okay.
And a lot of these old punk guys just used to hang out there all the time.
What's it called again?
It was called the Dull Hut.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of these old time punk guys, they just used to hang out there. A lot of old punker guys got into like country and rockabilly music, which I used to have a Western swing country band when I was younger. And so, you just meet people along the way. I used to live in Fullerton. You know what's funny? This is funny. If you watch the film American Hardcore, there's a scene where they're interviewing the two guys from the band The Adolescents, and one of the guys' name is Steve Soto. He actually used to work at the Dull Hut, and I used to know him pretty good. And they're being interviewed in front of an apartment building, saying, hey, this is the apartment building we used to party at back in the day. And I used to live in that apartment building.
Really?
Yeah, it was so funny. It was like I never even knew that's where that place was that they all used to hang out. But like I lived in it, like in 2006, so it was 20 years after the partying days of those guys. But yeah, there, being in and around music, just in the Orange County and LA County area, if you're interested in that type of stuff, you go to the shows and you just, meet people. I don't know how to explain it.
Mm-hmm. So wrapping this up, give us like the elevator pitch on what you've discovered about the punk rock scene, how it's manufactured.
I was a little bit surprised. I mean, I wasn't surprised in the sense of that to find all of this out, like, I can't believe it. Because I didn't really look up, I don't really look up to people in music personally.
Mm-hmm.
I just like the music they put out, so it's not anything where I have a personal attachment to these people. So in like 2007, and now that I've seen that movie American Hardcore, I kind of think that those guys, I was sitting on a porch with my friends, and they were talking about the Washington, D.C. punk thing that we just talked about. And now I'm thinking back that they probably watched that movie American Hardcore, and that's where they got that information from.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just halfway listening to their conversation, and when they started talking about rich kids from Washington, D.C. playing punk music, my ears perked up. And I asked them what they were talking about. And after that, like a year later, I heard Alan Watt on his radio program read one of the Dave McGowan articles.
Mm.
And when he read one of the Dave McGowan articles, I started rolling things around in my head, like, I wonder if there's some stuff about music I know that I'm not, connecting here. And then I thought back to that conversation those guys had about the Washington, D.C. punk, so I just started looking into it. And as far as what punk has done culturally to America and the world abroad, it's a form of degradation. It's destructive. That's what it always was. If you look at the old pictures and the old footage of the Sex Pistols when they're playing, Johnny Rotten is wearing a shirt that says "Destroy." Okay.
Uh-huh.
And that's always been the motive. If you listen to any of these lyrics, it's not about building up. It's not about doing good stuff. It's about breaking down. It's about destroying. It's about doing bad stuff. And that definitely influences a lot of teenagers because that's who it's marketed to. That's who it's directed at. It's not really directed at, people who have children and who have homes and things that they're striving for. It's directed at the youth who feel like they don't have, anything going for them.
Hope.
Yeah. And so even if you watch these documentaries about these people who are in these bands, who, most of these people who are in these bands, I truly don't believe that they're any sort of agents of any type.
Oh, no?
No, I just think there's just a select few of them who probably are. And you'll see those guys as being the big wigs and the guys who are on the major labels and that type of stuff. But most of these guys who are in these bands, they didn't really amount to anything. They still live in Orange County. So, and they can hardly talk. They've done so many drugs.
Oh yeah, I remember you saying that.
Yeah, you run into some of these old timers, and they're just like, spaced out dudes.
Mm-hmm.
So, they've been destroyed by it. And a lot of people, like I said, who you see, there's waves of time, right? Mm-hmm. And you go through these waves, you go through these motions and fads and trends and fashions and music and all that type of stuff, and it's meant to move you through a particular time period. Right. It's not really meant to stick around. It's not meant for ever, because there's going to be another wave that comes in that supersedes that one, and it's all manufactured. Mm-hmm. And it's all planned out ahead of time, way before you even hear about it. And most of the people involved in it don't even, they don't know the big picture behind it, but they're getting involved with it because it's the cool thing at the time. Mm-hmm. And so they don't even realize that they've been moved through an entire generation.
Well, you guys heard about the whole entire modern art movement, that happened during the 60s and stuff with Andy Warhol and all that stuff, and then they completely upturned the whole concept of what was art and all that.
Yeah,
there's been like rumors circulating around and stuff, and there's kind of more mainstream articles that are coming out, and it's more or less admitting that that whole entire thing was being spearheaded by the CIA, and Andy Warhol was he knew exactly what he was doing, and he was working for the CIA when he was at the being a figurehead for a lot of this stuff, and and then you got to ask yourself, okay, what does that do to the culture? It's like what you're saying. It just undermines this kind of basic concepts of beauty, aesthetics, and stuff like that. Just to upturn it, and same thing with punk rock and music. Like, okay, this is you watch that documentary. What is the name of it?
American Hardcore.
American Hardcore, and just like the majority of it is just absolute, it's unlistenable. It's just noise. It's just crap, And but then they're calling it's being referred to as music, and so you can also go to like stuff that was being put out by because there are a lot of parallels to this and the punk music scene, and then the whole Laurel Canyon thing with the 60s psychedelic movement and all that stuff, and how I think it was Mama Cass or somebody, like she said, or who, no, it might have been I forget exactly who it was, but they were asked, like, okay, what is what do you hope to accomplish and stuff, like what is rock music about? And he says it is to take and separate the youth from their parents.
Yep.
And that's exactly what it does. I mean, you think about it. You want something like punk rock music couldn't be more irritating. I mean, it's just like you want to listen to like I don't know, something like really like your fingernails on a chalkboard, just something really just obnoxious, and then say, okay, this belongs to you. And you take advantage of the kind of natural urge for teenagers to rebel, and then you give them something to identify with, and then but one thing that you're going to make sure that you're going to do is make it so alien to the parents that you're creating that generational rift, and like Alan Watt talks about it all the time, is like the purpose of it is like you're going to separate. It's it's another form of divide and conquer, but you're doing it this intergenerational divide and conquer where people are alienated from their parents. They're not going to look for their parents or their grandparents to obtain any kind of wisdom or anything what they're due because they're not hip, they're not cool, they're not with it. The Rolling Stones are where it's at, man. And man, I'm really into the Stones. I love the Stones. It's like, okay, what is their message? It's, man, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We're going to get high. We're going to party all night. We're going to drink all night and party all day. Get a lot of women, and then okay. But what's left out is like years down the road when that's why do the Rolling Stones keep touring? Because they have no families or anything to fall back on. All they have is that life of traveling and partying and stuff like that. And it's not that they don't want to stop, maybe, or maybe do, or maybe don't. But that's all they have. That's all you're going to have. If you devote yourself to that kind of life. And it does exactly what that's designed to do. It's to undermine the family and undermine those bonds and stuff, and do it through a thing that used to be pretty much exclusively a family or a tribal thing, as to make music together and stuff, and then enjoy it. That take that and use it as a wedge to divide the generations, and it's a weapon. They take it. It's been taken and turned into a weapon, and then piggyback on top of it all the feminist ideals and all that stuff, like they talk about in those other documentaries about the so-called riot girl movement thing and all that, where they call it third wave feminism or something like that, and very, very proud of themselves for promoting all that stuff. But yeah, what is the end outcome of it is just the undermining of those bonds. And Alan Watt talks about it too. So the end up goal is like it's the individual is left isolated and on their own, and it's just them against the system. It's just them up against the government. There's nobody around to stand up for you. You're on your own.
And on that note, I'm going to leave you with a quote here from a Discord Records band. They were called the Nation of Ulysses. Okay?
Okay.
This is what the Nation of Ulysses says. The Nation of Ulysses claimed to make weapons, not music. Discussing their second release, they asserted it's the blueprint for the destruction of the parent culture. It's like a zip gun. It's an instruction pamphlet for kids on how to destroy their home life, their domestic state. The Nation of Ulysses' first album was named The 13-Point Program to Destroy America.
Yeah. And with that, John...
That's your answer.
I was going to say, and with that, unless you want to finish up, I was going to say thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. I just want to say that's your anti-establishment.
Yep.